I'm Autumn Lockett.
And this is Mitch Randall.
And you're listening to Good Faith Weekly.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. And on this episode, Autumn and I are going to catch up. We're also going to talk about the stimulus bill that was just passed, $1.9 trillion going to be going to American families very, very soon. We'll talk about Beth Moore. She is out of the Southern Baptist Convention. And then also we're going to talk about the terrible pieces of legislation that is being passed across the country in states that are attempting to limit voting rights. So stay tuned.
I'm Reverend Starlette Thomas, a womanist in ministry and the host of a new podcast, The Raceless Gospel, from Good Faith Media. We're going to talk about that taboo trinity, race, religion, and politics. Season 1 of The Raceless Gospel has 5 episodes, 5 Sundays, if you will. We're going to take you to church each episode. We're going to talk about the sticks and stones, the skin and bones of Christian discipleship through the structure of a church service. And each episode, we're joined by a special guest who will bring a word. The Raceless Gospel Podcast. 5 episodes, all available March 22nd. I'm your podcast pastor, Reverend Starlette Thomas. Join us as we march into and beyond race, religion, and politics. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Autumn, how are you this week?
Well, Mitch, for the first time in my almost 16 years of being married, my husband thinks it was a good idea for us to have 4 kids.
Really?
Yeah.
So pray tell, why? Why is it all of a sudden great to have 4 kids?
That's stimulus money, baby.
Making it rain all up in here, are we?
Of course, when you look at their cost of childcare, medical bills, therapy, it's a plunk in the bucket. Come on.
Exactly. Yeah, you're never going to break even with those kids.
No, gosh, no. But it's such good news for American families.
It really is on so many levels. I was looking at some charts earlier today and reading some stories on the headlines, and just how this is going to affect everyday Americans is just an incredible feat. I'm so proud of our government and those who supported this piece of legislation, because this is really going to help those people who so desperately need it, and it's gonna happen quick, and that's good to hear.
Well, and there's not as much ego involved in this, so we won't have to go through the process of Biden signing all these checks. They're just going to send it out, since it is actually our taxpayer money.
That's right. The American people helping the American people. That's what this is about. So
Yep.
It's really, really neat to see. So not only is the stimulus package been delivered, and the president is about to sign it, and checks are going to be going out to pretty soon, as well as the extension of unemployment benefits. Just again, so much good in this bill, helping states, helping the vaccine rollout, as well as schools, and just so much good surrounding this bill. But not only that is going on, some other news this week. It seems as though after the 2020 election, we've discovered that some states didn't like the 2020 election and decided that they were going to roll back some of the voting rights of some citizens, and therefore making it more difficult for people to vote, in particular, people of color to vote. It's just
a big old surprise.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen it in Iowa. We've seen it more recently in Georgia. The legislation in Georgia they're considering would make it illegal for people to vote on Sundays, even though that has been a staple over the years, which our African-American brothers and sisters in Georgia see it as a direct attempt to take away their initiative, Souls to the Polls, as church members would gather at churches, and then they would bus them to the polls to help them vote in early voting efforts. It just boggles my mind that in a democracy like ours, that where voting is central to the health and vitality of our country, that there are a segment of the population that still wants to make it more difficult to vote and limit voting so that they can control the system.
But that's exactly what they're trying to do. And, we're hearing rhetoric about people saying, well, voting by mail doesn't need to happen unless there are, extenuating circumstances. They have all of these ways of camouflaging their overt, blatant racism.
Right.
And I'm not falling for it.
I'm not either. It is racism to the core. I think about the late Paul Weyrich, who was a right-wing political operative, who said openly that he is not in support of more people voting, because when more people vote, his party is hurt. He wants to restrict voting, and he wants to limit voting to only people that think like him. He doesn't want people who don't think like him to vote, because that's how they lose elections. And you're seeing that policy come into play. There is a huge segment within the country, primarily white, that want to limit voting by people of color, because they are finally seeing that the black voting bloc, the brown voting bloc, is extremely significant, and it's not leaning their way.
Yeah, so rather than amend things within the party that may be off-putting to voices that differ, we'll just go ahead and limit their voice.
Exactly. And that's just what is so heartbreaking to me, because, even in the Republican Party, that's certainly more conservative than the Democratic Party, there are some values that really are important to the African American community that the GOP holds. But they'll never cross that line to vote GOP, because they're so racist in their policies. And if the GOP could somehow come to Jesus and realize that what they're doing is extremely harmful to the minority community, the black and brown communities in this country, they may have they may have a shot in the future. But if they don't, it's just going to continue to dwindle into nothing. And if they want to hold on to that ideology, then they can dwindle into nothing.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of nothing, another big story in the headlines this week was Beth Moore, the very popular evangelical teacher and preacher in the Southern Baptist Convention, and really just across evangelicalism in itself, made a public statement this week citing that she can no longer call herself a Southern Baptist because of the Southern Baptist embrace of Trumpism and Christian nationalism, and that she peaced out.
Yeah, she did. She's been teetering on that wall since 2015. And this is just sort of my take on it. But when the sexual assault allegations started rolling out and there was no accountability for any of that during the Trump campaign, she really struggled. She has a background where she's a survivor of assault, and I think it really hit her in the heartstrings. And I know there are people on both sides who are, troubled by what's going on with Beth Moore. She hasn't come to this realization fast enough, or, why is she leaving her people? And you know what? She's made the best choice for her. And I know it was not an easy choice for her. And I'm proud of her.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very well said. And I just want to amen that, because, I have to admit, just being honest about my reaction to that news, it was like, what took you so long? Finally, you've come to this conclusion. But the last 30 years, certainly convinced me that I could no longer be a Southern Baptist. What all of a sudden changed? But I think you're exactly right. I applaud and celebrate her decision, because if we are going to win the hearts and minds of evangelicals to show them that this hard right ideology, this Christian nationalism that they have embraced, is not gospel, then we have to celebrate every person who comes to that conclusion on their own initiative, and just embrace them. Say thank you for finally making that decision. Don't chastise them for taking so long, because everybody's on their own journey. but they got there, they're here now, and let's celebrate that and move forward to help make a better beloved community and in the country a more perfect union.
Well, and it's not easy, but I think that's something that I really learned from coming into this community that is Good Faith Media, from the history of nurturing faith and ethics daily, and listening to folks who are, in the great cloud of witnesses ahead of me by some years and miles. Is inclusive doesn't just mean of far left leaning causes. Mm-hmm. Inclusive means being a soft place to land when someone has questions. And if we completely harden ourselves to anyone who thinks differently than us, and we don't give them a place to come when the scales fall off of their eyes, then we're just as bad as the other vacuum.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. We were talking about this in some staff conversations this week, and I've concluded for myself personally that we need to be this landing spot, as you articulated, for people who are asking questions. The only thing that I'm kind of hard-nosed about is I've embraced the popular paradox, which Karl Popper developed this idea that the only way to be inclusive is, unfortunately, to be exclusive to exclusionary people. Because, that's just a reality. If you have somebody who's going to be exclusionary in your organization or your movement, then you cannot fully practice inclusion. So I think as long as people, no matter where they are on their journey, even if they are not where I am on certain issues and think and believe like me, as long as they're willing to have a productive conversation and open to the concept that inclusion is the way of the future and the way forward, then I can talk to about anybody. It's those people who are really hard-nosed and say, no, LGBTQ people can't be, you can't support that. You can't include them in the church or affirm them. Same thing about race. Just name the issue. If they're hardcore about it, I can't have a conversation about them. But I like what you said. This organization, our ecosystem that we live in, needs to be a soft place for anybody who is searching and asking the very important questions about life.
Yeah.
Well, speaking about important questions, so we are really excited about a new podcast that we're going to be releasing next week, The Raceless Gospel with Reverend Starlette Thomas. Reverend Thomas is our guest this week on Good Faith Weekly, and we are just delighted to talk to her, and we cannot tell you how excited we are that the pod is going to be dropping next week. So stay tuned for our interview with Reverend Starlette Thomas.
Lot Carey is proud to bring you conversations with some of the best and brightest pastors coast to coast. Our new podcast, Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving, delivers wisdom from the Black church for the whole church. Find us wherever you get your podcast or listen online at lotcarey.org. That's LOTTCAREY.org. We look forward to the pilgrimage with you.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly, and on this episode, we've got a very special guest returning to the pod, Reverend Starlette Thomas. Reverend Thomas is an author, activist, and race abolitionist. She is a womanist in ministry and the principal architect of a raceless world. A pastor, denominational leader, and clergy coach, she is a natural shepherd of words and people, leading both to their authentic and best expression. She is a graduate of both Buffalo State College and Colgate-Rochester Koser Divinity School, an unrepentant academician and bibliophile. She is presently pursuing a Doctor of Ministry degree at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C., studying ecclesiology, the intersection of gender politics and race in their interplay for a transformative spirituality. Wow, that was a mouthful. She regularly writes on social political construct of race and its long-standing membership in the Church of North America on her blog, racelessgospel.com. Reverend Thomas, welcome back to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you.
Well,
we are so glad to have you here.
I'm still recovering from the introduction.
I mean, we're tired just saying it. I can't imagine living that truth every day.
That's right. I had to do so many vocal exercises before this podcast started to get in the words bibliophile and academician in the same sentence. But I did it. I was really proud of myself.
That was fantastic. How are you doing during the pandemic, Starlette? What are you looking forward to doing once we finally get out of these restrictions?
It's such a good question, such a weighty question. I thought about it, and the best word for it is that I'm clear. Like I'm clear on my priorities. Clear on my purpose. Clear on the people that I surround myself with. For a lot of people, my friends included, the pandemic has created a level of awareness about my life and how I want to live it moving forward. But when these restrictions are finally lifted, I'm getting on a plane and going somewhere sunny.
Amen.
My gosh. I'm laying on somebody's beach. I'm going to get an extra deep tan.
There you go.
Good for you.
I'm going to bake on both sides.
It is hard to believe. It's actually been a year this week.
Right.
That we have been under these restrictions. I was actually in your neck of the woods in Washington, D.C. when the country began to shut down. You know, I can remember there in D.C. the reports of a priest that it was reported that he had been infected with COVID-19 and he had officiated a service, and some fright began to travel through the Beltway there. They shut down the Capitol, they shut down the Smithsonian, the White House, and I remember calling back to my wife here in Oklahoma and saying, this is going to be a big deal. She said, well, how long do you think it's going to last? I said, probably a couple of weeks. Here we are 1 year later. So a prophet I am not.
We're stuck in a perpetual Groundhog Day.
Yes. Yes.
Well, Starlette, you are here for a very exciting reason. You've been working with Good Faith Media on a new podcast called, in association with your website, Raceless Gospel. But before we talk about the pod, I want to first talk about this entire concept of a raceless gospel. Now, we know that you've defined it on your website and on your blog, but for our listeners here at Good Faith Weekly, can you just real quickly give us a definition, a synopsis of what the raceless gospel means to you?
Yeah, so it's inspired by the Apostle Paul's words to the church at Galatia, chapter 3, verses 27 and 28. And he's talking about our baptismal identity in Christ. And he says these words: there's no longer Jew or Greek, there's no longer slave or free, there's no longer male or female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And that was it for me, that there's no longer beige or brown or black or red or yellow, that those social categories they're supposed to be drowned out in the water. But racelessness for me is not a post-racial vision. It's not a prescription for color blindness. I see you. And it's certainly not a call to ignore social injustice, I want to be clear on that, because we do a lot of things in the name of race, and it needs to be acknowledged. Instead, it's an invitation to really dive deep into our baptismal identity with Christ, and live without these categories as an expression of deep communion with Jesus.
Yeah. And you mentioned something in your explanation there that I think is very, very important, because, for so long we have been following you and you have been writing at goodfaithmedia.org on several occasions, some outstanding articles. But what you said a moment ago, that the raceless gospel is not colorblind.
Yeah.
And I think that is extremely important to note, because a lot of people today, in their understanding of racism and bigotry and our fight against those two things, they continue to say, well, I don't see color.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about, or that's not what you're talking about.
It's more so the power that we give to it. I certainly know for sure that there are no physically colored black, white, beige, red, yellow, and white people, but we do color people in and give them positions and power based on that. So it's important that I say that it's not about colorblindness, and it's certainly not about putting race behind us, because it's in front of us. It's about repositioning,
right.
So that we're following in the footsteps of Jesus, as opposed to following in the ways of whiteness, for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah.
So in a recent article for Good Faith Media, you wrote about 5 misconceptions people have when talking about race. They are, number 1, talking about race gets us nowhere. 2, and that's what so many people do, right? They just like, we're just like, it's uncomfortable and we get sweaty. And so let's just not talk about it. It's uncomfortable. Evangelicals are real good at that. We've been doing that about sex, about sexuality for a real long time. So, race just falls really beautifully right into that. 2, that we've said all there is to say on the subject. So check that mark. We've done it, gold star for us. Number 3, that race and its implications in society do not involve me. Or my voice doesn't need to be included in the conversation because I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
But like, I'm not going to respond to each of these, but we're all an expert in what we've experienced.
That's right.
Right. And if
exactly
we as let me get this right, socially constructed white people,
come on in here.
Who's going to? Sorry, I'm having a little bit of church. Number 4, talking about race only leads to more division. That's one we hear a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And number 5, that talking about race makes it a problem. So can you expand on all of those and tell us why we have so many misconceptions about race?
I'm not getting ready to redo the good job you just did. What I will say is that it's because we do not have consistent conversations about race. We only talk about race when there's a trauma. And then once we start feeling better about it, once the news is over, then we stop talking about it. Not only do we not have consistent conversations, we don't have informed conversations. Most folks can't tell you the definition of race. They can't tell you they can't tell you the definition of it or the goals of it, that it's a color caste system or when whiteness began. They can tell you about the experiences with racism, which is not the same. So we're having inconsistent conversations. We're ill-informed about race and the issues that arise around it. And then we just simply refuse because we don't want to talk about American slavery. We don't want to talk about police brutality. And what I hear is we don't want to talk about injustice.
Yeah.
We don't want to deal with reality.
Because it's not an easy fix.
We
want one button to push and for it to be done. And that's not the way this works.
No, it's even worse than that because we prefer to continue living as if nothing has happened. Because the preservation of the myth of America the Beautiful or America, the land of the free, the home of the brave is more important.
Yeah.
That we prefer to live our lie, our beautiful lie, our sweet lie, our comfortable lie, than to accept the truth of our neighbor's experience. Our lie, that comfortable lie, that familiar lie is more important to us.
Yeah.
It's just more important. So I would rather ignore your suffering so that I can continue to exist in the way that I do.
Right. And do you think when we do have these conversations, one of the things that impedes progress that could come out of these important conversations that we're having is that many of us, no matter what the pigment of our skin might be, are really not honest about race, as well as honest the fact that all of humanity has a tinge of racism within them.
Absolutely.
Why do
it starts with telling your own story.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how it started with me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it started with me.
Mm-hmm.
I started asking questions, and I'm from the South, and that's not something that we do. Children have a place, and you stay in it, no matter how old you are. And so I started asking questions. I started asking questions about how I came into the world, and I didn't like the answer. I asked my mother, why did you choose my dad? I was 19 years old, trying to figure out who I am as a person, and I thought she was going to tell me a love story. They met at the mall. He pushed her on the playground. They passed notes. They saw each other from across the room. He winked at her, whatever. No, she said she picked my dad because he was light-skinned with good hair.
Wow.
My mother is a beautifully dark woman, but she didn't want her children to look like her. Mm-hmm. And it just continued. So race in my family was at the head of the table every time my dad showed up, but it was also at the foot of my sister's bed. Yeah. My sister had gone into labor prematurely and we couldn't get to her. So by the time we got there, she'd already had the baby, and my fictive kin, my aunts, my mother, they were already there. And my niece, she was beautiful as ever. And so they're having regular conversation, counting fingers and toes. I'm sitting in the chair, minding my business because it's not my turn. And they start having another conversation. They start turning her body around and twisting her around and trying to get the right position on her. And they huddled around her. And they started messing with her ears. And so we started having a conversation about whether or not she was going to be light-skinned or dark-skinned. And it took them a while. Because they said it was like I wasn't even in the room. They were talking about how much trouble she was going to get into if she were not, and how light skin was the right skin, it was the bright skin, it was what socially colored white people would approve of, and that, and once they determined that she would be light skinned, then they start talking about how beautiful she was, how much trouble her dad was going to have on his hands, and he better get a shotgun. And this is all done by beautifully dark women. And I just couldn't believe that we were having this conversation. I couldn't believe that they were saying what they were saying. And so from then on out, I thought, I really need to listen to what my family is talking about. And our family is ruled by race. That's why I do this work. All of our interactions are just that. I was on the phone with a relative just the other day, and she said to me, if you need anything done in your house, ask white people to do it, because they're going to do it right. Wow. We need to tell those stories. We need to have those conversations, because those are expressions of self-hatred. They do not love themselves. We do not trust ourselves. And a lot of that has to do with American slavery and the ongoing assault of African Americans, or those socially colored brown and Black. Those conversations need to be had. Those stories need to be told. And good old millennials like myself, we like to tell it all. We like to keep it 100, as they say, because you can't fix a lie. You got to tell it. And so it's important that I tell it now, and that I tell it often.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. The problem of colorism, as you have outlined in a previous article addressing a situation with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, is just really extraordinary. You did a brilliant job in retelling your story, as well as laying out the truth for all of us, and we appreciate it.
Well, there's so many people who are just clutching their pearls about that story. And I'm like, did you watch the wedding? Did you not see this drum beat coming? Because I did.
And that it led her to almost take her life. I don't think people realize the violence of racism. How it will make you want to cease to exist, because the tabloids are essentially writing her eulogy. No human being is built to sustain that level of criticism. For someone just to hate you because you simply exist. And so her only option, she thought in that moment, and I'm so glad she didn't, was to disappear, because race has no room for you. I applaud her. I felt like I needed to do it. She was incredibly courageous to do so. And so other people needed to do it. And I wanted to join in on that.
Well, you did a great job. A really good job.
I wanted to be in her amen corner. I did.
You did. So
let's talk a little bit about the Raceless Gospel Podcast. We are so excited.
It is amazing. We have heard clips.
I'm
so excited.
So you and Good Faith Media's media producer, Cliff Vaughn, created the layout to replicate a worship service. Why did you decide to talk about race like that?
Because race is a member of the church in North America. Because race needs to be acknowledged as a pillar of the church, as one of the biggest givers in the church, as a founding member of the church. It also needs to be taken to task by the church theologically. I think we need to have conversations with church in the church about race, and we don't do it well. A lot of our hymns involve it. We include. You want me to start singing "Jesus Loves the Little Children"?
Yes,
children of the world, red and yellow, black and white. They're all. That's not how Jesus loves the little children. But we've written our songs to accommodate race, and something has to be done about that. Something has to be done about that. It is a competing creator. Race suggests that there are separate creation narratives, and if folks are beating Bibles, that's not what it says in Genesis. It doesn't say that God created races separately, but that's what the gospel of race calls for. That's what the creators of race suggested. I'll give you a nice word read to the listeners. Polygenesis. Race believes that there are multiple Genesis narratives, that each group is created separately to maintain the superiority of whiteness.
Right.
Now, let's talk about that in Sunday school.
Right.
Yeah. I love the brilliance in which it's laid out, because immediately you feel like you are entering into a worship experience. And as you articulated a while ago, that race has not only been a dominant force, but it has been perpetuated and really endorsed and, forgive the term, baptized by the church in this construct that has affected all of humanity and every society that is known to the world. And so, so setting it in a spiritual, worshipful experience, I thought was just absolutely brilliant. And you have this testimony time in the service, and as well as the prophetic. And in the prophetic, you interview some guests, and you have a great lineup of guests. So tell us a little bit about who you're going to have on the show.
All my friends, all wrestling with race. So it's just,
all you good troublemakers. This is what
it is. They take their convictions very seriously. They're serious about Jesus, and they're willing to leave the church to follow him. Mm-hmm. And so Justina Guest is the managing editor at The Bitter Southerner. Leslie Copeland-Toon, she's the chief operating officer at the National Council of Churches. Thomas Bowen is the Earl L. Harrison Minister of Social Justice at the historic Shiloh Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. Michael Bledsoe, my brother, my good friend, is a retired professor and pastor at Riverside Church in Washington, D.C. And finally, oh my gosh, the brilliant Jeremy Bell. He's the General Secretary of the North American Baptist Fellowship, who never leaves you without a benediction. He always gives you a party.
He does. So,
yeah.
Well, it's a great lineup. And again, we've heard a couple of episodes of the podcast, and it's just absolutely brilliant. So when does it drop again?
March 22nd.
March 22nd. So make certain to subscribe to the Raceless Gospel Podcast. You'll be able to find it wherever you listen to your podcast, and it's going to be available. I think there's actually a trailer at the Raceless Gospel Podcast right now.
We're going to splice it in at the end of this episode too, so you can get a little taste of why you need to go and subscribe right now.
There you go.
So if there was one thing you want our audience to know or forget about race, what would that be?
Man, that's such a good question. I would leave him with a question. How high up do you have to climb to color in the face of God? Mm. What position have you put yourself in that you claim that you've seen the face of the divine, and that deity, that all-powerful creator, looks exactly like you? Mm.
Wow. That's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want you to leave us with some hope, Pastor.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's been a long year. We just talked about the pandemic has been going on for a year now. It's hard to believe within this year, set within the pandemic, we had one of the largest movements rise up regarding racial justice that the country has ever seen, probably since the Civil Rights Movement. And it was heart-wrenching, it was terrifying, but it was also inspiring to see so many, especially so many young people out on the street, marching, protesting, demanding justice during this difficult day. And so with that, we can feel as though there is no hope when you see all the injustices in the world and continue to see young black men gunned down by police. Continue to see the iniquities.
The police not held accountable for it.
Right.
Continuously. Yep. Sorry.
No, you're right.
It's so
you said it just right. You said it just right too, Autumn.
Yeah. So, we see all of these injustices, and it seems as though, sometimes it feels like we're not making any progress. But, Pastor, tell me there's hope.
There's always hope. I was marching in those streets all summer long, and there's a lot of people with ears to hear that are not buying this race narrative, who know that they are made in the image of God, and who felt closest to God when their feet were pounding the pavement. They know that, I had conversations with them that Jesus didn't die to save their skin, that Jesus is not a mascot in our race war. They're farther along than we think. There is a generation coming that is not going to tolerate this. It's not going to put up with it. And so I'm very confident. I'm very confident about the future. The fact that we're talking about a raceless gospel, we're refusing to accept a narrative, this 400-year-old narrative, this institutional narrative, this systematic and a systemic narrative. There's hope in that. Mm-hmm. And that God is saying no more. Get your hands off of me. I am mystery. How dare you suggest that you know me? How dare you? Yeah.
Well said. Well, I am glad that there's hope, and you give me hope every time I talk to you and listen to you preach and teach and speak on the Raceless Gospel. I am always inspired, and I am Well, I will thank the Lord till the day I die that Cliff, Vaughn, and I walked into a room in at the Bahamas at the Baptist World.
Bless your heart.
I know we were suffering for Jesus
for the
there.
gospel. Come on now. We were suffering.
We were suffering.
Everybody has a cross to bear, and so
That's
ours
right.
was in the Bahamas. But the Lord said, "Go."
Yeah, and we went.
The Lord said, "Who shall I send?" And I said, "Well, Lord, if it has to be somebody, send me, I'll go." And Pastor Mitch, he heard the call as well.
I did.
And we have to be obedient.
That's right. That's right.
That's right. But walking into that room and hearing your lecture that day, changed my life, and I appreciate your insight and your wisdom. It's great to be able to work with you on this podcast and hopefully future endeavors to come.
Can we give Cliff a shout out?
Yeah,
Woo-hoo,
absolutely.
Cliff.
Absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
Best person to work with. Brilliant partner. Gives incredible feedback and has held my hand the whole way. He is quite the cheerleader, and I wouldn't have made it through without him. He's an exceptional human being, and I'm deeply grateful for him.
Thank you. He is a master class, no doubt about
Yes,
that.
he is.
Absolutely.
Yes, he is.
Like humble and quality at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So shout out to Cliff.
Well, I feel like you've already given us about 47 of these, but I'm going to ask you if you have, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell," and I'm sure that Starlette always has more to tell. So can you give us just one more little nugget of goodness before we go?
Yeah, hold me accountable. I'm supposed to be finishing up a book on the Raceless Gospel. But a lot more of these stories. So
Good.
I'm saying it now, so you'll hold me accountable.
Well, we
Okay.
will. That's right. So next time you're on the pod, we're going to ask you, so where's the book?
You should. You should. And I would appreciate that. I really would.
I love it.
Well, Reverend Starlette Thomas, thank you so much for joining us at Good Faith Weekly. Wish you the very best as the Raceless Gospel podcast drops in a few weeks. Make certain to go and subscribe to the podcast. It will be worth your listen. We're dropping all 5 episodes at the same time, so you'll be able to hear them one by one. So it's great. So thanks for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
And now, before we sign out, we want to let you, or give you a little taste of the Raceless Gospel. So tune in and enjoy.
I'm Reverend Starlette Thomas, a womanist in ministry and the host of a new podcast, The Raceless Gospel. In this upcoming and ongoing conversation, word is going to meet flesh. We're going to talk about that taboo trinity: race, religion, and politics. Season 1 of The Raceless Gospel has got 5 episodes, 5 Sundays, if you will. We're going to take you to church each episode. We're going to talk about the sticks and stones, the skin and bones of Christian discipleship through the structure of a church service. And in each episode, we're joined by a special guest who will bring a word. We've got Josina Guess, managing editor at The Bitter Southerner.
There are pastors who are losing their congregations because folks are saying, well, we just want the gospel. Why are you making it political?
Is that how they sound, Josina?
I don't know. I shouldn't be making fun of people that have made an idol of their comfort.
We've got Reverend Jeremy Bell, General Secretary of the North American Baptist Fellowship.
As Baptists, we sometimes preach on the same wretched favorite passage that we love and get stuck in the epistles for several years. I mean,
You said wretched favorite? You're trying to offend everybody. The preacher's gonna be mad at us.
Bless us all.
We've got Reverend Dr. Leslie Copeland-Toon, Chief Operating Officer at the National Council of Churches.
Those are always the worst sins, the ones that you don't do. And it's like, stop that.
They're gonna have a meeting in the parking lot about us after this podcast.
We've got Reverend Thomas Bowen, the Earl L. Harrison Minister of Social Justice at Shiloh Baptist Church in Washington, D.C.
And with every generation, we got to go all the way back and try to find this Jesus. We're always playing catch up. I don't understand
And
that.
then we will pause and blame Jesus and not ourselves.
Ah! Because you didn't give me directions.
Right. So
you told me it was a left and not a right.
Because when we want to be bothered with Jesus, then we discover that Jesus is some other place.
And we've got Reverend Dr. Michael Bledsoe, an author and former pastor of Riverside Baptist Church in Washington, D.C.
Let's demythologize America. Quit having the president inaugurated with his hand on a Bible. I'd be more comfortable if you put your hand on a box of cornflakes. I would prefer religion not be used to kind of smoke and mirrors cover up what's happening here.
Race, religion, and politics. It's a threefold cord that ropes the pews of the church in North America. And it is time that it be unraveled. But first, we've got to untie our tongues.
It's about tearing down idols. I mean, like literally taking the white Jesus off your church wall. That would be a step. For the churches that have white Jesuses on their walls.
You gonna ask them to get rid of their white Jesus?
Yeah, because it's a distraction.
Wait. You're asking a lot, because you know many people believe Jesus
you know what?
Was and is white and is coming back as white. He's coming back
and
again.
They can take that American
so you're
flag,
saying take that down?
And they need to take the American flag out of the sanctuary too.
Oh,
because I'm telling you, my friend, the nationalism.
Oh, you gonna step in it today?
I'll step in it. Look,
come on in here and speak a word. Speak a word.
The Raceless Gospel Podcast from Good Faith Media. 5 episodes. We're going to drop them all on you at once on March 22nd. I'm your podcast pastor, Reverend Starlette Thomas. Join us as we march into and beyond race, religion, and politics. We're going to flesh it out.